The UV4 Life 3001B air sterilization system is what your home or small office needs. I've personally experienced the benefits of the UV4 Life 3001B in my own home. With its multi-layered filtration system, my allergies are more under control and the air noticeably cleaner and fresher. Go to uv4life.com and enter the code GREEN at checkout and get $50 off. What is more important than the quality of air you breathe? Don't just filter your air, detox it. Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green, and you're tuning into AMTV, Alternative Media Television. Today is Wednesday, September 9th, 2015. In today's video, you'll learn about the migrant crisis, the untold story. Why are we seeing horrific images of dead children across our television sets right now? A child lying dead face first on a Turkish beach, yet conveniently being blamed on Syria and the government of Bashar al-Assad. Why are grown men throwing their arms around their wives and throwing them dangerously onto train tracks more willing to commit suicide than run the risk of being sent back to a bloody and destabilized Middle East? Why are hundreds of thousands of migrants eagerly and feverishly crossing what appears to be a borderless Europe and Eurozone? Why are countries like Germany welcoming all these migrants with open arms? Even the Pope is getting involved. What's the agenda here? What's the root cause? Many of you know that one of the fundamental ways you transform a society is to change up the makeup of its voting population, something that Barack Obama has successfully accomplished over his 2 terms, this radical transformation of the United States. Keep the borders open, everybody that comes in that's dependent on the welfare state and therefore bleeds it dry will support and vote for these liberalized democracies. They go the way of the Democrat. This is supportive, of course, of Barack Obama, his 2 terms, one of the reasons he was voted in twice, and should be, of course, supportive of Hillary Clinton in 2016. We're seeing the same thing happen in Europe right now. Of course, everybody coming over, all the refugees that are dependent on the welfare state that they're bleeding dry, will henceforth vote for these liberalized democracies and support the politicians that take ownership over the people that have just crossed the border illegally. There's other reasons. Corporate America, self-interest, create competition among the labor class, the peasants, really just indentured servants, living under the illusion and false narrative of a democracy or a republic like it's supposed to be here in the United States of America, and drive down wages to therefore increase profits. These, of course, are all legitimate reasons, but they're really only half-truths. Again, what is the real agenda? And what is the cause behind all of this gross destabilization in the Middle East that is driving people to flee their homes? And why is the mainstream media shining a giant spotlight on it? Again, they could just ignore it if they wanted to, but they're showing us these very emotional images for a reason. Let me take you back to 2013, just a couple of years ago. At the time, intelligence agencies here in the United States were crafting a bullshit story and building a false narrative around the idea and accusation that the Bashar al-Assad government had launched a chemical attack against his own people, murdering and killing innocent men, women, and children. We reported on this at AMTV. In fact, we had several viral videos on this. We said it was a sham. It was built on a foundation of sand, and it was a lie. And it was being used by intelligence agencies here in the West and her allies to galvanize public support for an eventual attack on Syria, a new war. And this is how the United States and the United Nations and the UN draws us into war on the guise and false pretense, the lie, the bullshit of very much like a George Bush WMD's weapons of mass destruction, but this time it's a humanitarian cause because Bashar al-Assad is gassing his own people even though it's a false flag and it's a total friggin' lie. Bashar al-Assad wouldn't do this unless he had a death wish. And why would he even need to do it? He's winning the war in Syria against the insurgents that the United States is arming. Henceforth, several months later, Obama did just what we said, and he began aggressively, anti-constitutionally, bypassing Congress and illegally bombing Syria. It took months later, an independent journalist like ourselves pounding the pavement, and the lead investigator of the United Nations, humanitarian investigator, Carla Del Ponte, to point out And I'm paraphrasing a bit, that it was far more likely that it was the US-backed rebels, terrorists on the ground that were armed, funded by the United States, that were responsible for initiating the attack on civilians, innocents, that killed men, women, and children in Ghouta through chemical warfare, than it was the Bashar al-Assad government.
And we have no indication at all that the government, the authority of the Syrian government have used chemical weapons.
Because of course, in this chess game of war, Bashar al-Assad would have no self-interest to attack himself. It would just assure his own demise. We saw the same thing in Libya, around Benghazi Gate, the illegal trafficking of weapons, CIA operations that led to the death of Christopher Stevens, for example. We saw this with the indirect assassination and murder of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, the agenda of the United States to, again, destabilize the Middle East further. We saw it with George W. Bush, his illegal invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, based on the false pretenses and lie that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, even though years later our government says that actually wasn't true at all. All of this based on lies. All of this being built around a false narrative later proven to be false. Just like Ghouta, just like the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that were started by Bush and continued by Obama. And now we have this migrant crisis, this very emotional event that Americans see on TV. We want to reach out to these people and we want to help people. In the media, building a narrative that the person responsible for all this and the country responsible is Syria. See, their failed attempt and coup in 2013 has only built a new narrative around al-Qaeda, which has evolved into an arguably even more radical and terrifying element and terrorist organization in the name of ISIS, ISIL. Of course, many of you tuning in also know that Osama bin Laden, for example, used to be on the same team of the United States. He was an ally of the U.S. when we were fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. It was only years later that we turned against him and turned him into the dragon head propaganda piece that he was to justify illegal wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now that has simply translated itself into a more dangerous entity known as ISIS and ISIL. If the Eurozone is letting these people over, letting them cross the border. You see, Syria is a chess piece. It's a proxy for war. The agenda has always been to destabilize the Middle East. And the U.S. wants Bashar al-Assad out. Most Americans only see fear and terror and heartache when they view these images on Fox or CNN. And they will grab onto any false narrative that's presented to them. They will support any illegal war, invasion, intervention in these sovereign nations that they think will solve a problem that's being portrayed to them that was actually created by the media that's owned by Washington, D.C. and the intelligence arms that make up the U.S. government. But they don't understand why. You know, ask yourself the question, is the Middle East safer today than it was 10 years ago? Is it better, and are they better off today than they were before Operation Iraqi Freedom? I always love that, how they throw that into the name. Operation Iraqi Freedom. More like Operation Iraqi, let's destabilize, destroy the entire country, and turn it into a war zone that now makes up the Levant today. The answer to the question is, of course not. The Middle East is not better off. Even our own government tells us it's far more dangerous than it ever was before. They're even justifying a brand new war. They're about, as they already have been doing through bombing, anti-constitutional raids on the country, about to invade Syria. We see this in the mainstream media now. Russia's getting involved, building military bases, and the U.S. is warning that they're concerned that this will destabilize the Middle East. Isn't that a joke? The whole agenda is to destabilize. The migrant crisis is real. People are really suffering. Women and children are dying. But again, who's responsible for this? Who has been actively campaigning historically to destabilize this part of the world? Who has been illegally invading countless country after country, whether or not it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, drone strikes in Yemen, and now Syria? Again, why is the mainstream media shining such a giant spotlight on this issue. Why are they playing to our emotions? Why is the Eurozone allowing hundreds of thousands of people to cross into its borders? We just told you the reasons. If you look closer, if you study the Middle East, and you see Syria as a proxy for a much greater war, you'll understand why. All this ties into the Iran nuke negotiations, which only prove that we lack negotiating power and leverage over a country that still refers to us as the Great Satan. There's a further agenda here. Again, it's not just one country. It's not just 2 or 3. As General Wesley Clark pointed out not too long ago, we're taking out the entire Middle East.
This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
That's the real agenda. That's the truth. And that's the untold story of the migrant crisis.
I'm Christopher Green. Get this video out everywhere, make it viral, hard-hitting it in your face, and click the link below to support our sponsor.